Thank you very much. It's an honour to be here, actually. This is the first time myself and Tash have spoke together, but we speak separately at events in the UK, so to be part of B-Sides here is awesome. I'm Stu, this is Tash. We are the cloud security team at a company in the UK called Photobox, but there's actually 5 brands that are part of that group, one of which is here in Munich called Poster XXL. We have a bit of a split presentation here around some of the experiences I've had, not just in Photobox group, but in my career and some of the learnings that I've had. And I think Tash is going to expand on some of the things that she's been part of. So hopefully there's a lot to learn and we can share some of our failures as well as our successes. So a little bit of background about me. I've been in IT for about 20 years, but I've only been in security about 7 or so. So I'm not an expert. And I'm actually not convinced that anybody is in security who's an expert because it's such a difficult field. And there's so much to learn. I do public speaking, I guess, some of this kind of thing. I run a meetup in Scotland, which we get a great amount of people at. I'm one half of a thing called Cyber Scotland Connect, which is around building communities and bringing organizations together in Scotland, which is where I live. And I think that stuff's really important. I think the keynote today made some great points about community and events, and how important that is to spread the message within security in our wider industries and personal lives. I also run an AWS security Slack forum, or I'm not sure I run it, I facilitate it. There's a QR code towards the end of this presentation. You're welcome to join. I think there's about 1,000 people on there now sharing all sorts of great information. And over to Tash.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm Tash. I am a co-lead for the OWASP Women in AppSec London chapter, which is launching in April, which is really exciting. I'm also on the board for DevSecCon, which is a developer security and operations kind of combi conference that runs around the world. I do loads of threat modeling stuff. That's my passion. So I work at Photobox with Stu. I'm in his cloud security team, but we are in a really small security team, which I imagine quite a few of you might be able to relate to. And having come from a big kind of corporate enterprise as previously in financial services, moving to a really small team has been quite an eye-opener for me. And it means that I don't just do kind of my segment of security, I also cover anything else that kind of comes in that I might be able to touch on. So threat modeling is something I'm going to talk about a little bit more later. But it's been a real way for me to engage with a lot of different areas within the business and help support them in being more secure. So I do some cloud security stuff. I also speak a lot on blue teaming and cloud security. So I'm really excited to share with you in a little bit later in this presentation some of the kind of my favorite blue team tools and techniques that I use with the groups that I work with. So I'm going to hand back to Stu, who's going to kick us off.
Cool. So as I said, we have 5 brands in the Photobox group. Sorry, but I like memes, by the way, so there might be some silly pictures and things, because we don't take ourselves too seriously. So we have 5 brands. 4 of those brands are in AWS, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. So joining one company can be daunting, but generally it's one tech stack. It's one set of code. We've effectively joined 4 companies at once, myself and Tash, because group security sits over these brands. And as I said, 4 out of the 5 are in AWS. So it comes with a stack of complexity beyond perhaps what I've been personally used to. And some of those things are not unique to covering lots of brands. This could be within your organization. So differing tech stacks, differing program languages. We use a number of different programming languages across the group. Cultures. You can have different cultures within different teams within your business, let alone across different brands. Different levels of maturity. So again, some of our brands are new to AWS or newer to AWS, and some have been in AWS for a number of years. Business structures, different sets of executives to speak to, different boards to have to go and fight for money at, different levels of knowledge. So these are things across our group that we have to try and meet the challenge for. From an AWS point of view, we have a number of accounts spread across those 4 brands. One brand uses Terraform, other uses CloudFormation. Makes our lives a little bit more tricky to try and strategize cloud security, and I'll try and explain a little bit more about what I've tried to do in the short time I've been in this role. So my initial journey, I actually joined as the head of security engineering at the Photobox group, and realized there was a gap potentially to do something in AWS from a security side. So I created a role. The role didn't exist. I decided to go and do it and then try and recruit to build that team. And as Tash mentioned, we're just a small team of 2 at the moment. And Moonpig shifted. We're a high transactional e-commerce website, and shifting into AWS. The initial work that I did there was not the sexy, tooling, tech-based side of things. It was sitting in well-architected reviews with AWS. It was manually auditing accounts and setups. But it was the first time really a security individual had been at the company at that point in terms of that the maturity and the movement. So it's really, really important. So if any of you are in that journey into the cloud and you have the ability as security professionals to embed yourself in that at the very early stages, it's super important. But what do you focus on? How do you know what to go after? So that was the challenge I found myself having. This is an opinion as opposed to a fact. So if anybody would like to shout this out, this to me is the most important thing that I've done in this company. It's the most important thing that I will do in my security career. What's the most important aspect of securing the cloud? Anybody brave enough to shout an idea out? That's super important. That's crazily important. It's not what's on the next slide, but so for me, it's recruitment. It's getting the right people in to do the job, because if you don't have the people with the talent and the skills or able to learn those skills, you're not going to do all that great work that needs to be done. So for me, great to work alongside Tash, incredibly skillful person in the AWS space. So for me, recruitment's probably been the most important part of the roles that I've been a part of in security. The other stuff is super important as well, obviously. You just need to say that. So but that's a challenge, and we know that's a challenge in security. The diversity thing was talked about this morning as well. We continue to try and work hard to make that better, but recruiting talented people into your teams is super key. So what I tried to do was define cloud risk. Risk is not a sexy word, I'm afraid. It's what will give you the strategy or the ability to build strategies around what you go after first. You don't need to do this yourself, because there's a whole stack of benchmarking out there or other organizations that can help you with it. I found the CIS benchmarking for AWS incredibly useful. And what I tried to do was really define around 50 to 60 major areas that any business could be concerned with from a pure AWS point of view. And this is with Tash's great help as well. And we really split it into these 8 different areas, of which this won't be unusual to anybody in AWS. And it's really given me an opportunity to focus on where our particular sets of brands might want to strategize. And you can see that there's those 8 different areas there. Now, I've put these into a document on GitHub. You're welcome to have a look at it. It's just industry based. It's not company specific, but it gives you an understanding of some of the areas you might want to think about if you're in AWS. And it's given me personally the ability to really think about what to go after. Now, I also want to talk about how we work as a team, because that's really important. We're actually I think we're a really agile small team within our business. We're an agile organization anyway, and that means different things to different people. But we're very heavy users of Jira. Anybody who follows my boss, Dennis Cruz, will know how passionate he is about mapping things in Jira. So what I did was I took those 50 or 60 potential, business industry-wide AWS risks and linked them in Jira to our cloud infrastructure higher level risk, which any business would have if they're in AWS. We allocate management and technical owners to those things, all within Jira, so that we can quickly see who's responsible for what. And then we link our OKRs, which is objectives and key results for anybody who doesn't use those, which are in a sense projects. They're the pieces of work that we define to reduce those risks. And we link them to any vulnerabilities we then find within the business, and track progress on those pieces of work. And that allows us to see the work that we're doing, to visualize it, and to be able to track it and see whether we're reducing these risks. Now, we work in 2-week sprints, which there's only 2 of us, but it works really well. This is not our Kanban board, by the way. It's just a generic Kanban board. Ours has got far more in it. So we split our OKRs into manageable chunks. We break those down and we do sprint planning. But we've also started bringing lots of other things into our Kanban board and our sprints. So business as usual work that we know we need to do, team meetings perhaps, things where we do dedicate quite a lot of time. We bring our incident work in if things happen, training, and then we have a service desk where other teams can create work for us, which all comes into these Kanban boards and allows us to make decisions on what's more important. And I think give us better reporting to the people that need to see see what we're doing. I think security can be very difficult to visualize what you've achieved over a period of time. And I'm not saying sprints is a perfect way to do it, but it's working for us, I think. So what have I really learned over the last 6 months? It's been an incredible learning curve, particularly because I don't perceive myself to be an expert in some of these areas. Your journey has to start somewhere. If you don't have a security team dealing with AWS or cloud, you should maybe try and consider how you make that happen, especially if you've got lots of data in there. Changing businesses takes real time and graft. It's just painful. It can take years to change the culture of one business, let alone 4 or 5 at a time. People repeat mistakes. I'm certainly guilty of that, as I'm sure anybody is, but we need to find a way to make that better. How do we either automate procedures or processes to prevent people making the same mistakes? Cloud is hard and complex, as is all of security, I think. And recruitment for me is key. So what's helped? Other training platforms are available. I find these things super useful. I invested a lot personal time in these things. Cloud Guru for me of late has been great. That's a paid product. Cybery is a free learning tool. There's lots of good videos on there to help you learning. And part of our roles is continuous improvement and continuous learning. I spend a lot of time on YouTube and SlideShare watching presentations from other people who've fixed problems that I'm trying to fix, because I can't spend all day trying to make up ideas. It's too difficult. Other people have generally solved those problems. So I'm going to pass over to Tash, who's going to give her version of the story.
Cool. I got that. Okay. So Stu did a great job when he joined of kind of setting up this the team, this cloud security team that didn't previously exist at all, and then defining some of the kind of security and the risk areas. And then I came along about 8 or 9 months later. The thing that I really wanted to talk about with you guys today was, based on that kind of underpinning structure that Stu's laid out, how do we actually start to really make a difference with those teams, and how do we guide them? And the first thing I learned was that I had this preconceived idea that for our engineers, moving to the cloud was easy as just picking something up and running with it. But what it actually was like was software engineers that were previously just software engineers that did their one thing became infrastructure engineers, database admins, back-end engineers. And you all of a sudden become full stack without really being given the support and the guidance to be able to help them. So being a very, very small team, I wanted to think about the things that I could do to make an impact in the quickest way possible with our teams, without stretching myself too thinly, without filling up that Kanban board too much, which I'm still incredibly guilty of. And I wanted to share my favorite things. So the first thing is my cloud security pyramid scheme. This is my Ponzi scheme, as it were, for security. This is how I scale. So it's actually security champions, but I recognize that I am one, and with Stu, there's just 2 of us right at the top. And we work incredibly hard to be able to kind of scale out and to expand our team. So what I figured is I would just use software engineers to do that for me. One, they're not included in the security team budget, which makes our CISO really happy. But 2, they're already embedded within the teams. They already know what they're building best. They know it way better than I could. So we created this Security Champions program, which, to its credit and to our CISO's credit, did already exist, but wasn't very well attended, and became this way of security teams just telling the engineers what they'd done wrong that week, or telling them the biggest vulnerabilities and risks that were present that week for our teams. And what we actually did is start to turn that around to become a forum where we could share things we were working on, where we would encourage our engineers to share things that they were working on. And even better, we use it to crowdsource problems and solutions. So we mentioned we have all these different brands, and they're all using different tech stacks. That means different CI/CD pipelines. We've got a huge spread of tools, just tools and languages that are being used, which means things that might be repeatable within one company all of a sudden aren't repeatable anymore. But the problems are still the same, right? The problems of key management, of certificate rotation, all of these things are still there, of encryption. So what we did is we would get teams to present a problem that they'd been facing, and we would crowdsource that solution within the room to a point where we would get where each of the brands had pulled something from it they were happy with, and then they were going to go away and talk to their wider teams about what that solution looked like. No longer did I have to have the same conversation 4 or 5 times, but it was happening for me at that one point and then spreading out through our teams. We're doing some interesting stuff with this, gamification, We've been looking at kind of how we embed it within our engineering team's OKRs. The idea is empowering security teams or engineering teams to become your security SMEs within their environments, so that when they do come to you, it's for those bigger things. It's for those niche problems, those really interesting questions. But the rest of the time, they are your eyes and ears within those teams and empowering them themselves. It's worked really well so far, anyway. The other thing I've been doing is threat modeling. Hands up anyone who knows what threat modeling is? Awesome. So for those who don't know, and I'm going to be guilty of this, there's a whole load of different frameworks and ways to threat model. I tend to introduce it as quite a simple process, and I'll cover that in the next slide. But my favorite thing about it is that everyone already does it. And for those of you that had a question earlier about how you get more women in your teams, let me tell you, the women that are looking to join your company are threat modeling you. So they're looking at where your office is, what your team is like, the things that you do, and they're doing a risk-based decision on whether or not they should go and join. Things like your job descriptions. We're threat modeling that, and I'm looking at all of those things you've got on there in your required section, which you know that you're not going to hire, but you put it in your required section, and I threat model that, and I think, well, I'm not going to meet all of those things in those required sections, so I might not apply. If you think about when you go on a flight somewhere or you park your car somewhere, you threat model that situation. You think about what are the things that could go wrong, or what are the things that could happen if I do that thing, and what might not happen if I do that thing. So threat modeling is something that is very real and very natural to a lot of people. And what I do in teams is I just add a framework and a structure around that. And what it does, it allows those teams to get upskilled in security. It allows me as a byproduct to learn a lot more about what they're doing. And for me, it's been a really great way to kind of expand the relationship and the way that teams react and behave with each other. So how do I do it? So I just use 4 questions. I use a really simple methodology, and then I partner that with something called Stride. So my 4 questions: what am I doing? What can go wrong? What can I do about it? And did I do a good job? And I say I a lot here, but I get the software engineers to answer this question. So I get a whole team, a whole squad in a room, and I get them to sit, and I ask them, what are you building? Draw it out for me. Show me the architecture or a data flow diagram, whatever it might be. And then I ask them what can go wrong. Most software engineers will have in their head these niggling, oh, okay, as long as I don't get too many requests, that API endpoint will be fine, or as long as no one works out that really complex URL will be fine, or whatever it might be. And this is a great way of pulling that out and actually walking through, okay, what are the problems with that? Things I've seen previously with public S3 buckets or public objects in S3 buckets is teams saying things like, well, it's a really obscure URL, so no one will find it. And we know there are sites like Grey Hat Warfare where it will enumerate and scan for public objects that have got crazy complex URLs. There's stuff that's just not safe. And threat models is a great way to pull that out. We always make sure that we go through mitigation options. The final bit is the did I do a good job? Is a really great way to get that team together and understand, is this working for you? Is threat modeling a useful exercise? What tools can we use to make it better? And there are some tools that I use with teams that help to make us to help make finding threats much easier and much more straightforward. And I'll cover those off. But if I could recommend you take one thing away, if you're not doing this already, threat modeling is a great way to scale that security piece. But it's also a great way to build relationships with your teams. So does anyone actually read your security policies anyway? This is the biggest thing when I was doing the threat modeling was teams, we pull things out like lack of encryption or public objects or whatever it might be. And I'd be like, this is simple stuff. And across the companies that I've worked for, I kind of realized that all of our security policies are these huge bloated documents that actually half the security team haven't even read. And someone from a policy team might have put together, or it might be something pulled directly from a policy pack online. And it's actually unreadable or unmanageable. So I figured when I'm doing these threat models and we're finding these bugs, I can't really rely on our security policies to support that. So I thought, well, they're still useful and I still need them from an audit requirement piece. How do I actually make them consumable? So one of the things that I'm working on at the moment is writing tests. So this is an example of a BDD test from the OWASP Cloud Security Project. But effectively, rather than encouraging my engineers to read these huge policy documents that are incredibly boring, how do I write automated tests in a language that's already familiar with our engineering teams, whether that's BDD, TDD, whether I'm doing it in Ruby, Python, whatever. How do I kind of automate that findings? And the great thing about cloud is we've now got infrastructure as code. So previously where my tests might have just been active in application layer, I can run these tests against Terraform or CloudFormation, and we have to, right, because we know with all these brands that we've got all this fragmentation. I can start to automate finding these security vulnerabilities, but I can also rewrite some of our security policies into a way that's much easier to read. Because the other thing about these standards is the language is so formal and complex that it's not even really consumable. So this is something that's been really powerful for helping those teams. The other thing is gamifying security. These are elevation of privilege cards by Microsoft. These are free, so you can get these from GitHub, from Microsoft website, and I'll share a list of all the resources at the end. These follow the categories of STRIDE, which is spoofing, tampering, so on. So when I'm in a threat model and we're thinking what can go wrong, and we're doing step 2 of that model, and teams are struggling to think of security issues because they're not security experts, these are a great resource for helping them to think of different attack vectors or different threat vectors. And they're really just prompts. Some of the language in them is a little bit, I don't want to say archaic, but they were built quite a while ago. But they're great prompts. They help teams to kind of really quantify denial of service problem. And when we think about services like Lambda and AWS, where if you've got a lot of Lambda invocations happening at once, you can hit a throttling problem, which can be quite serious. It's something that Netflix came across right at the very beginning and then expanded this whole architecture idea of having many, many AWS accounts for one application or one service. But these are a great way to kind of build that out and bring those threats out during the design process. You don't even have to wait until they've built something. And that was the thing that I found with the tests, is I had to wait until they'd already started to build the code. But now I'm bringing it into the design process. I thought about this a little bit more, and I thought these are great, but I'm still relying a lot on the language, and they're not cloud specific. So I'm going to introduce you something that I've been working on. I've not yet released it, so you have to be patient if you like it. But I wanted to show you something that I thought might take this to the next level, and I'd love to invite you to contribute as well. So I've been working on cloud security elevation of privilege cards. So this is a way of taking that gamification a level further. And the same with the original elevation of privilege cards. You can almost play it like a card game. You can get points. But the language wasn't really that great. So I've been working on AWS-specific threats. And I've also been talking to someone from Azure and luckily from Google, because I felt really guilty about being here at Google and speaking a lot about Amazon. But I've been looking at how do I create AWS-specific threat vectors that will prompt engineers to think of, okay, what would happen if this happened in my environment? Am I asking for authentication, authorization at every layer? Am I inherently trusting what's coming? Am I using VPC endpoints? Have I got public objects rather than, I've checked that all my buckets are public and that's fine, but can anyone release any object anywhere? So we created these cards, which will hopefully be released soon, open source, and I'm looking for contributors to them. So if it's something that interests you and you are going across this, let me know, and you can absolutely contribute to it. But already kind of doing quick trials with teams, this has been a really positive way for them to identify and come up with threats that can help make us more secure. So these are my favorite resources, some things I've not mentioned. Cloud Custodian, which is in the top one there. When I talked about writing my tests at the beginning, it'd be a BDD. What this does is I then implement it via Lambda function within the AWS account itself. So if I've missed it in a test phase, I can have a Lambda function that continually scans for public objects in S3 or unencrypted EBS volumes, or overly permissive IAM roles. It's really customizable. So whatever you think of, you can alert on it. But you can also make it preventative. So rather than just sending off an SNS notification email if you've got an unencrypted object, you can get it to just kill the EC2 instance and terminate the volume, which is a little bit intense. But I found it really useful for those high-risk environments. You can get it to be really preventative on that side. Just make sure your engineers are super happy for you to do that before you do it. The only other thing I want to call out on there is Security Monkey. This is a Netflix tool for security. Has anyone ever configured Netflix security tools before? Yeah, it's awful. So their documentation is really awful. SecurityMonkey especially relies, one of the dependencies they rely on a very specific older version. It's not version pinned. And it took me a really long time to work that out when I was trying to get it to work. However, it is pretty cool. Once you get it up and running in AWS, it's really cool. I would just, if you're ever looking at configuring a Netflix tool, there's loads of complimentary blogs by people that have got really pissed at Netflix, and then rewritten their own deployment stuff. But it is really cool once you get it running. So these are my favorite resources. I think that's it from us. Anything else? Do come and chat to us. We have an office at Poster in Munich, and we work for these other brands as well. And if you've got any questions about the stuff we do in AWS, let us know. You'd be more than welcome to join our Slack forum that Stu runs. There's representatives from loads of different companies in there, and they cover a load of different topics and just news about cloud. And there's some Azure and Google forums, I believe, on there as well.
Cool. No, nothing more from me. That was awesome. Thank you very much. I think.
Thank you, Tash and Stu. Probably actually have time for 3 or 4 questions. So your hands up, please, if you have questions for them.
Sorry, I have a question. What's your go-to tool about visualizing architecture in AWS? How do you go about that?
Yeah, we've used so Cloud Mapper and CloudCraft, which have been quite good for pulling out the architecture. I must admit, when I do a threat model, I make people draw it. That's because about 5 or 6 years ago, I had the case of the missing firewall, which is a box that made its way somehow from an original draft design to a design that was approved but never actually built. And no one could answer about it. So I get people to draw it in every threat model anyway. But Cloud Mapper especially has been really good.
And I think that's, as a small team, that's a really important thing because it improves our learning, but it improves the engineering team's learning as well. We're in a sort of tricky position about what tooling to add at any point in time as a small team because it takes effort to be on top of it.
Okay, so I see a question here. Are there other questions in the room that I'm maybe missing?
You're welcome to get us afterwards. We'll be here all day.
Hi. So I've got a question about the security champions area. And forgive me if I missed it in the presentation. So how did you actually approach teams about it? Hey, I've got this cool idea that I want you to start doing. How did that conversation start?
So it's a good question because it can be really hard to get people to invest time in security, right? I must admit, before I took over the forum, people were what I'd like to call voluntold. So rather than being volunteered, they were voluntold by someone. What happened was there was a conversation with leadership, and leadership were really behind it, but there wasn't really a conversation at engineering level. So people didn't really put themselves forward, so they were voluntold. What I've been starting to do is work on the PR of the security team. And that's really helped people to say, actually, I want to have more conversations. The most successful thing I think I've done so far, and it's a bit cheeky because it was really recently, is I held a lock picking workshop. So just in our breakout space, in our kind of where people eat their lunch, I had a message earlier in the week, and I got it kind of in like our office newsletter, and did some stuff on Slack. And I was like, I'm just going to be doing some lock picking workshops if anyone wants to come along and learn about lock picking. And then once I got them there, I was like, you're going to have to learn about the security team. But that was really fun because I got people from marketing, design, our UI and UX teams, as well as tech. And for me, for the security champions to be really successful, I need people from everywhere in the business, including those people that come up with those crazy new products that we should all work on. I wanted them to engage and chat to us as early as possible. So I'd obviously have those conversations with leadership to say, hey, this should be part of your objectives, and this is really important, and I can help you find bugs earlier, shifting left, all of that stuff. But then I would just go on like a marketing rampage and do this stuff like free lunches and all that stuff that shouldn't have to work, but you got to do. But honestly, the lock picking stuff, I got stuff on Amazon for like the equivalent of like 60 euros. So a load of padlocks, a load of picks, and I got loads of people. And that was I think so far that's been the best way of pulling people in.
I agree. I mean, we've got an OKR specifically on, we're calling it our PR campaign. I mean, that's us trying to get around all those different brands and all the areas of the businesses in ways that works for those parts of the business. Because, as you say, some things work for one teams, other things, don't work for others. There are different technical levels, different levels of ability. And I think I've had a similar experience in other companies where throwing a training course over the fence and hoping that somebody's going to complete it and be enthused by it doesn't actually really work. You've got to find other methods to engage with teams in whatever way that is. Now, it is a big commitment in time. It's a huge part of our roles from a time commitment. But yeah, things like the lock picking, it just gets people involved and they realize that actually a lot of what we do is not boring and it's not dull and we're not trying to tell people to not do their jobs. So yeah, it's just trying to bring people on that journey.
I'm going to do a bit of a shameless plug in the lockpicking part. I actually think we don't have picks to lockpick right now, but there are a few locks that need to help the cat escape from the box that you can do from the online challenges. So please check out the CDF afterwards. And doing lockpicking workshops could be an idea for next year. So if there are experts here, or maybe you want to visit us again. There was maybe one question here, and that will be the last one.
Hi. I have a question. You said you're using Jira for tracking the vulns. Did you have to customize it? How do you rate the vulns first? Can you talk a bit more how the setup is for you?
Yeah, we've heavily customized Jira. We have all sorts of ticket types and labels and tagging, and yeah, it's quite heavy actually in terms of how we use it. We've Dennis, our boss, has created it's called a GS bot. So it's a bot that allows you to quickly create tickets and link things together, which has been really, really clever. But yeah, that's taken time to do. Yeah,
we wrote a Slack bot that queries the Jira API, and then we would say show me threats related. So we created IT assets and threat ticket types. So when I do a threat model, I have an IT asset. It could be a particular container cluster or whatever, and then I'll link my threats to it as Jira tickets. So then teams can link their stories to fix to those. So then I can create a Slack bot, and I can be show me all the threats related to this asset. And we encourage the business to do that too. And then you can see all the threats and the status, what are being fixed, what stories. It's really cool. Doesn't mean a lot when I'm this is all the stuff we do. Dennis has created, so our CISO, who did a lot of the underpinning of that Jira taxonomy, it's got some slides on SlideShare. I'll retweet them today. Slamish plug from my Twitter. But I'll retweet them today, so you can see a little bit more info on how we do that Jira taxonomy, the ticket types and all the linking as well.
That's probably our key, isn't it?
So that's the sign for break coming soon. Thank you very much, Stu and Tash.